Let's see if I can shoot this across the room.
Okay. Oh,
Woo!
Woo!
Modern. We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Holtzman. This episode, I've got a great long-form interview for you with my good friend, Eric Holtzman, who is a movie expert and a bit of a cocktail enthusiast himself. And we thought it would be kind of fun to take a few iconic 20th century films and examine them through the lens of the cocktail. In particular, the French 75, the White Russian, and the Singamore Sling. But before we jump into this interview, I wanted to quickly apprise you of a couple events where you can hang out with Modern Bar Cart here in the month of October 2018. This Saturday, October 13th, you'll find us at the Urban Market at Merrifield, held outside at the Mosaic District in beautiful Fairfax, Virginia. We're going to be sampling and selling all of our excellent products there, so be sure to swing by the booth, say hey, maybe grab a couple cocktail supplies for your weekend cocktail projects. Then later this month, on Friday, October 26th and Saturday the 27th, we'll have a booth at the Taste of DC held at RFK Stadium, which is conveniently located here in DC, right off the Blue, Orange, and Silver Line, Stadium Armory Metro, for anybody coming in from out of town. We'll have some cool new products available for you at that event, and hopefully I'll be able to hit the culinary stage and demo some cocktail recipes and techniques. Ticketing information for that event can be found at thetasteofdc.org. Because we go way in depth on several cocktail recipes in this episode, we're going to skip our featured cocktail segment and dive right in to the show. So, break out your 3D glasses, turn off your cell phone ringers, s'il vous plaît, pass the freaking popcorn, and enjoy this interview, star-studded for your pleasure, with my friend, Eric Holtzman. Eric Holtzman, welcome to the Modern Bar Cart podcast.
Glad to be here.
We're sitting here at Casa de Kozlik, and the goal for this evening is to just have a little chat, go through 3 iconic cocktails, and kind of talk about some of the movies that they were portrayed in, and just kind of, weave that narrative of the cocktail and the film. And I myself am not particularly well versed in film. I never took a film class of any sort, and I don't really even consider myself a movie buff, but you are a different animal. So can you tell people who are listening how you got to be so well versed in film?
Starting, frankly, ever since childhood, I had this childhood dream that I wanted to one day be an actor in movies. Like that was a freaking dream. Like that's what I wanted to do. I would actually watch movies growing up, and even after having just seen them once, I could recite back whole lines of dialogue. I could recount whole scenes. I had this weird, crazy memory for it, for just movie quotes and doing even kind of goofy impressions or impersonations, what have you, or mimicking characters or accents or voices that I saw in movies. All kinds of stuff. We're talking. I was raised personally. I guess I owe a lot of this to my dad, but a lot of comedies. We're talking like your Mel Brooks movies, your old Airplane, Hot Shots, stuff like that. And then, but also dramas, musicals, war movies. Literally every genre, except I don't really mess with horror. I will confide that to you all. Not really a horror movie guy. But yeah, so long story short, grew up with movies. I am definitely kind of a movie buff, while having not necessarily gotten the designation of being a critic. I'm not a film critic. I am not in any way professional about this or certified in any way, but I'd like to think I'm at least a sliver of an authority figure on the subject. So let's put it that way.
And then you're also kind of like in that acting sphere. You and I also have a bit of a shared kind of pastime. You a little bit more of late than me, but we're both kind of improvers.
We're both improvisers. So yeah, kind of at different times. I guess you got started on it more in college, which I only recently found out, my friend, and that is awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, for fun, I actually just stopped a couple months ago. Just wanted to take a little break, but for roughly the past year, pretty much consecutively, I, along with a couple other friends, just for fun, took improv comedy classes here in the DC area. And really fell in love with it. It's so much fun, as well as I do.
Definitely. And you get to practice all those kind of voice mimicking things with the different characters that you create, and then scene setting as well, which is also something that as a film buff, you've kind of have at least like an innate understanding of it kind of running in the background.
Totally.
So definitely those types of soft skills that you can come into improv with actually really help you to start enjoying it faster, I find. Just being able to think on your feet like that. These are definitely skills that improv teaches, so anyone can go into improv and kind of learn these skills. But it sort of enhances and speeds up the learning curve if you can come into it with that sense. So anyway, we're off topic right now. But
bit of a tangent.
Yeah, but that's okay. Go improv. We're going to jump in and start talking about 3 movies in this podcast episode. And we're gonna here's gonna be kind of the arc of the episode. I'm not gonna spill the drinks right now. We're gonna kind of ease into the drinks as we talk about the movies, but I will tell all the listeners out there what movies we're gonna hit. So first, we're going in a quasi chronological, not quite chronological, but at the very least, we're starting with the oldest movie. And all of these movies are at least 10 years old, at least 15, at least 10.
I would say, I think we're going on 20 years. I think we're going on 20 years for the most recent one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 20 years old. And then the oldest one that we're starting with is this movie that kind of gets held up as the crown jewel of classic Hollywood. And that movie we're going to start off with Casablanca.
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 Okay.
I don't know. Starting off with Casablanca and then moving on to a movie that we all know and love, The Big Lebowski.
Dude.
Which is about as different from Casablanca as you could be. And then we're going to round it off with a movie that is actually based on a book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So those are the 3 that we're going to hit. And I'm just going to let you take it away on Casablanca. And the question that I hope you can maybe start with is, what is so special about this movie?
Right. So Casablanca, I'll say first and foremost, is by far one of my favorite movies. I mean, all time, easily top 5. I've probably seen it. I don't know, probably at least 10 times. And, before I die, there might be another 100 in there. It's a movie that I can honestly say I've never gotten tired of. It's one of those movies I've found that you can rewatch. And one of the best parts about every, new time you watch it is you kind of maybe see something different or see something new that you didn't notice before. And it could be like the slightest little thing, maybe just a little character nuance or maybe something about what the cocktail or drink that one of the characters is, imbibing, all kinds of stuff. We're talking early 1940s, black and white. This is this was like the heyday of early Hollywood. This was, World War II was in its early stages. The U.S. this was shortly after, this is 1942, shortly after Pearl Harbor, at the end of 41, of course. And so the U.S. was just getting into the war, but where it takes place, in Casablanca, of course, in North Africa, that part of the world had not yet been, I guess I should say, invaded by the Allies. It had not yet...
Not really seen conflict.
Yes, right. And it was very much under the control of... I may be mispronouncing it, but I believe they called it the Vichy regime, which was the Vichy French regime, which was essentially allied with the Nazi Party and with the Axis powers. So, for lack of a better word, it almost felt like you could compare it to living in the colonies of the U.S. during the Revolutionary War. There was, of course, always a large presence of, Vichy or German military and politicians and government around. But basically, it centers around a man by the name of Rick and his cafe, Rick's Cafe. And I should say cafe / nightclub / casino. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. There's table games, there's roulette, there's a very lavish bar with seemingly every kind of liquor and champagne cocktail imaginable, very classy. It's the kind of place where everybody who walks through the doors is just dressed to the nines. It's a very nice place. It's kind of formal. It has a decidedly European vibe about it. And I know I'm kind of going in several different directions with this, but that's, again, another thing I just love so much about this movie is the style of the movie and just the character of the setting, if that makes sense. The character of Rick's Cafe, along with, of course, you don't even really have to mention it. It goes without saying, but the cast is stellar. I mean, Humphrey Bogart, you have Ingrid Bergman.
Yeah. So you put a lot of characters, a lot of really interesting characters in a kind of a special setting, right? It's this very in-between place, right? It's in between kind of the Axis and the Allies.
Right.
And you've got American expats. You've got expats from all around the world there.
Perhaps not, I wouldn't say refugees, but yeah, people who are trying to flee.
Yes. And there's a great scene, probably my favorite scene in the movie, because it's just a very direct symbolism of the kind of the inner conflict, and it actually breaks out through song. Where in the cafe, there's a group of German soldiers who start singing kind of like the anthem.
It's a very nationalistic anthem that was actually popularized during World War I. But yes, a very famous old German military song, and
right.
They're kind of singing it very uproariously and it kind of obnoxiously so.
And then what happens next?
Well, and so then you have essentially the main female character, Ilsa, in the movie, played by Ingrid Bergman. Her current flame when the movie opens is a Czech freedom fighter by the name of Viktor Laszlo. He's a good man. He's a freedom fighter. He's with the resistance, essentially. And he hears this. He hears, this the Germans singing this very nationalistic song, and it just kind of ticks him off. He gets pissed, and his first thought is to kind of storm down to the bar's essentially resident piano player, and also there's a trumpet horn section, and he kind of just defiantly says, play La Marseillaise, the famous French national anthem. And they kind of hesitate at first, but then Rick, Humphrey Bogart's character, he kind of comes out of the wings, makes eye contact with the band, and literally just gives a simple nod. Doesn't say anything, but he gives just the nod of the head. And then they start playing at La Marseillaise, and the better part of the bar, the majority of the bar, starts singing almost instantaneously with it, and it very quickly just drowns out. And it's kind of like, I'd like to think, or the way I think about it, almost like just a middle finger to that group of Nazi officials who's at the bar, just kind of getting drunk, carrying on, and singing this, at the time, very offensive and threatening songs. So.
Sure, yeah. So we've kind of set out these main characters, and the cocktail that we're going to feature for this is actually a very French cocktail. It's the French 75, and this is actually a cocktail that I'll let you kind of take us through the invention of this cocktail and why it has a significance on the military themes of this movie. So while I mix it up here, I'll let you do that. But before I do that, I'm just going to kind of run through the recipe so that folks are aware of it.
Yep.
The French 75 is a classic cocktail, and it's not pre-prohibition. It was invented after the Volstead Act was enacted, which is actually why it was invented in a place that was not the United States. But it comprises of 1 ounce of gin, 1 ounce of simple syrup, 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice, and then it's topped off with 3 ounces of champagne and garnished with a nice lemon twist. So the last thing I will note about the actual technical formulation of this is that it's a stirred cocktail. So you stir the ingredients and then you kind of top it up with that champagne. It's often served in a large champagne glass or in something like a nice highball glass, because some champagne glasses tend to be a little bit on the small side. And since you're adding 3 ounces of champagne to the already kind of, existing ingredients there, sometimes there's a space issue if you don't have large champagne flutes. So we're serving it in a highball glass tonight. And the original formulation, there's kind of like some argumentation over whether to use cognac or gin as the base spirit. As you can imagine, cognac is going to yield a slightly mellower, darker characteristic, and gin is just going to be a lot more refreshing. So it being kind of the tail end of summer here in DC, we're using the gin. But why don't you take it away, talk about the invention of the cocktail, and then we'll wrap up Casablanca by kind of giving folks maybe not so much a spoiler, but kind of like a sense of, the arc of the romance, which is why people really come to it, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the really interesting things about this cocktail is it was invented pretty much right, I'd say basically at the end, right after World War I, the Great War, as it was called then. And it was invented right in Paris, France, actually by a barman, a bar owner, a Scotsman by the name of it's Harry McElhone. And I'm sorry if I totally butchered that last name, McElhone. But this guy, Harry McElhone, he opened up his own bar in Paris, I believe starting, it was either right before 1920 or just in the first couple years of the 1920s. And it was called, I believe, Harry's New York Bar. But mostly people would just refer to it as Harry's. And so this was, the 1920s, the roaring 20s in Paris, France. Prohibition does not exist here. It is a very socially liberal city. It's a fun place to be. It's a very lively place to be. And it's also a city that is no stranger to the arts, and all that encompasses: writing, painting, acting, theater, all kinds of stuff. And so with that, there were actually a handful of very prolific, whether at the time or later in life, prolific American artists, writers, poets, actors, actresses, composers who moved to Paris in the 1920s and lived there for a few years, and they all kind of became friends. And you'll recognize some of these names here in a second. I should also note, if you've ever seen the movie Midnight in Paris, a recent Owen Wilson, Rachel McAdams movie, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to, and that is folks like F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Gertrude Stein. Very long way of saying Harry's was a bar that was in fact frequented by all these guys all the time. It was a hot spot, especially for American expats and kind of just all matter of international celebrities that were passing through, downtown Paris and at the height of the roaring 20s. And that's where they'd go to get their drinks. That's where they'd go to get their cocktails because, frankly, Harry and his staff never disappointed. And I'm not sure if it was necessarily Harry himself or his staff, but I believe it was Harry himself who thought up what is now the French 75. Kaz mentioned the ingredients, and basically it started originally with that kind of champagne base.
Speaking of which, let's get a little champagne
let's
cork
do that.
on Mike.
Wait for it.
Let's see if I can shoot this across the room.
Okay. Oh, woo, woo! Take your head off, man. But so basically a champagne base, but he wanted to, of course, kick it up a notch, give it a little something. It can't just be, a glass of champagne. He wants to turn this into a memorable and unique cocktail. And so the story goes, he chose to add gin as the other main spirit, the other main alcohol base. And the story goes the name came from it being served to someone, and they took a sip of it, took a swig, and it just really packed a punch, a little like ooh, like make you make you stop and come to. And they compared it to getting shelled by a French 75 millimeter field gun, which was kind of the mainstay artillery piece of the French army during World War One.
So you've got one in front of you,
Yeah.
just prepared. So, and you see how I did.
Let me see. All right. Woo! Yeah. It's true.
Refreshing. Let's see. I'm
true.
just going to take a little sip. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've been doing 30 days off the booze.
Oh, well, there you go. Little sipperoonie.
Oh, that is refreshing. I'll give it that.
Oh, yeah. So, right. Packs a punch, but yes, very refreshing, especially this time of year when it's warm out. Springtime, summertime, early fall. Funny enough, though, on just a bit of a side tangent, Harry in that very same bar, Harry's I think it's an American bar or
New York bar.
Harry's New York bar. I think it went by, frankly, a couple different names, but it was an iteration of one or the both of those. He also invented several other cocktails that we all definitely know to this day, and I'm sure you all know. Just to name a few, the Bloody Mary was invented there. I believe also the Sidecar, the story goes. And I think I'm forgetting of a couple others, but surely a fair amount of cocktails that have certainly held up over time were, in fact, invented, thought up, first concocted, what have you, at Harry's New York bar or Harry's American bar.
Yep. And that's actually the genesis of, there's actually two schools of Sidecar. It's either the Paris and the London or the Paris and the New York. And this is the provenance of that, right? So the Paris version is the kind of Harry's bar take on it, and then somebody else spun it a different way. Really, it just boils down to what ratios of sour to sweet to booze you're using. Sorry, so we've got the French 75. The movie we've been talking about is Casablanca, and one of the great things to me about the movie is that it's a love story that, for various reasons, and each person viewing the movie has kind of different reactions to it, but it doesn't work out in the end, at least in the way that a tidy love story would work out in the end. Yep. So can you tell us basically who the lovers in question are, and just your thoughts on the ending of the movie?
Yeah, so the two main characters on which the story really centers around are, of course, Rick, Humphrey Bogart's character. Rick, the proprietor of the, in his own words, gin joint. This is his world. Like, this is his house. And on one, fateful evening, seemingly just a regular evening at his bar, who strolls in but a former flame by the name of Ilsa.
And this is Ingrid Bergman's character.
This is Ingrid Bergman's character, yes, another very famous actress of the time. And she strolls in with another lover, the aforementioned Czech freedom fighter by the name of Victor Laszlo is his character's name. She and Victor are at the bar both nights. They're actually they're trying to get out of Casablanca, kind of on that. Again, I don't know if it was necessarily refugee status, but they're trying to flee.
He's got work to do in the resistance.
Exactly. Back to mainland Europe. So with that, you kind of have Rick reminiscing and remembering that he really loves this woman. And I think at times you get a sense of that from Ilsa as well, from her character as well. And there's a few kind of flashback scenes of time they spent together in Paris shortly before the Nazis marched into Paris and invaded the whole of France.
So what's the kind of like the moment that the conclusion of the movie hinges on, right? So we've got these characters, they kind of rehash their old love. The current conflict is very apparent, right? These folks want to get out. Rick kind of wants them to stay, at least Ingrid Bergman's character. But what's the thing that happens that kind of sets up the ending of the movie that makes it such a classic?
It essentially becomes very clear that she is very much in love with her new flame, with Victor Laszlo. And Rick he essentially, while it takes him, the better part of the movie, he comes to accept it. And he realizes, I guess I should say further realizes, because it's not like he was ever oblivious, but it becomes increasingly apparent, the gravity of the whole situation. And even in just that seemingly 1 or 2 days in which the movie takes place, you get the feeling that things are really about to go down. It's really about to get worse. And
on an international level.
On an international level, exactly. And for Victor and Ilsa, it's getting out of Casablanca, and Rick accepts that, and he ultimately comes to terms with the fact that he's got to find a way to help them. Mm-hmm. And it ends with Victor and Elsa ultimately getting out of Casablanca. And funny enough, Rick doesn't move. The film ends with him still there. Doesn't look like he's going to leave. I don't believe he has any intention of leaving. So it's kind of an interesting end to the movie where he's let this, this former flame go, but he stays. He has no intention of leaving. And you can take it any which way, that maybe he's a stubborn character, or he's too proud to, leave his own cafe, leave his place.
I think another reading could just as easily be he realized that she was going to be happier with this other guy, and so he kind of did the adult or the kind, caring thing. But I think the one last point that I'll make is that this movie came out at a time when the United States was kind of debating about whether to enter the war. It didn't come out at that point, but the narrative of the movie was set like just a couple years before, when the U.S. was still kind of on the fence. And so the decision to act and the decision to help these people continue to be together, and also to help this freedom fighter go and do his work and actually assist in that, was kind of like this not very thinly veiled metaphor for the U.S. like, hey, come and help out over here in Europe, guys. Kind of do your part. And so that's also an interesting part of the movie.
I think literally, I could be off by a few months, but I think literally within a month or two of when Casablanca premiered, the U.S., along with our allies, the UK, invaded North Africa. They actually, one of the landings was Casablanca itself. It was a major port town.
So there you have it, folks. Casablanca.
Why don't
you take another healthy sip of that French 75?
I shall.
We're gonna get you a little tipsy here. All right, so we're departing from this very classic, very well respected, and kind of like, how do I put it? It's like the filet mignon of movies, to something that is more akin to like a pint of ice cream in many ways, in terms of like the tone and the what you might even refer to as the nutrition of the movie.
Yeah, you could say.
So that movie is The Big Lebowski, and I really enjoy this movie.
Love it.
It's one of those movies where the plot is maybe less important than some of the dialogue, and like really the enjoyment of the movie comes from the relationships of the characters and the way that they kind of act toward one another and try to solve a problem together. Another movie like that more recently might have been like The Hangover. Yeah. Right. We'll get into a little of the plot here, but a really interesting way that I've heard the movie described is it's a guy trying to solve the problem of a rug that got peed on.
I love that.
Like that's just like an encapsulation of the movie. So can you give us like literally a 30-second, just very brief plot snapshot of this movie in the most general terms, and we can zoom in if we need to?
I'll certainly try, because it's definitely, to your point, it's a movie with a lot going on, and a lot of times when it comes to, those various scenes or characters or kind of predicaments that they get themselves into, I mean, these are like ridiculous storylines, ridiculous characters in ridiculous situations, but
very much hyperbole.
Very much, but also, that being said, all the more hilarious to watch. But anyways, in a nutshell, the plot, the best I can do is basically, and kind of how I interpret it, is it follows, the dude Lebowski.
Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges' character, exactly. And
But is the dude Lebowski?
so I think Lebowski's the dude, or no, he's the dude, and but he's dealing with Lebowski, this very kind of old eccentric multi-millionaire in LA, and who has had his kind of what do I say, like sugar bunny, like little had a young 20-something, a young Tara Reid, a young girlfriend, kidnapped by at first I guess unknown assailants, and it kind of intertwines with the dude having his living room rug peed on by a couple, criminals, couple hired thugs who were breaking into his place, thinking that he was that millionaire. He was Mr. Lebowski. Mm-hmm. He's not. Sure, that's his last name, but no one ever calls him that. He's just the dude, and the dude abides.
Right. So they look him up in the yellow pages, essentially.
Yeah, right. It's a case of mistaken identity, and what then ensues is this whole long kind of contorted web of scenarios and characters and kind of ridiculous crime where the dude gets swept up because mistaken identity and the real Lebowski, millionaire Lebowski, learns of him, brings him in, meets him, tells him of the situation, and kind of tries to get him to get his girl back.
Which is slightly ridiculous in and of itself.
Right, exactly. And
but the interesting thing is, so like there's this concept in storytelling and filmmaking. Usually it's called the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you're telling an effective story, it means if you tell the reader or the viewer something, they should believe you. They should be able to, even if it's like a fantasy story, they should be like, even if you're like, and then an elf walked in, they'd be like, okay, I'll believe, like I can suspend my disbelief because it seems like there's a logic to this story. It's coherent. In this story, they almost go the opposite way. Instead of being like, well, this is an unrealistic situation, they double down and they make it more ridiculous by adding ridiculous characters. So let's cover the cast real quick. We've got the dude who is Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges, amazing, iconic, hilarious.
And
you've got his best friend, Smokey, played by John Goodman. Mm-hmm. And then a great cast of supporting characters, including everyone from Steve Buscemi in a very kind of, it's a role that I think is constantly referenced. And a particular quote that's often quoted is whenever John Goodman, and it happens several times in the movie, is John Goodman's character, Steve Buscemi, he speaks up or he has something to say or makes a comment, and John Goodman's always just like, Steve Buscemi's character's named Donnie. John Goodman's like, shut the fuck up, Donnie.
Yep.
Donnie, you're out of your element. You're out of your fucking element. Pardon my French. But it's this iconic line. I've said that myself to probably all my friends at some point. But then you also have John Turturro in this kind of weird, almost kind of unexplained, seemingly very random role, but it always cracks me up. He's this other kind of competitive bowler in this bowling league that they all frequent and play in a league in.
Jesus.
And his name is literally, Jesus. Spelled, Jesus. He's like, nobody fucks with the Jesus. Mm-hmm. And it's the John Turturro. And then you have Philip Seymour Hoffman. He's the assistant
to the Big Lebowski.
To the real Mr. Lebowski. And I forget the name of the actor who plays the real Lebowski, but he was a famous actor back in the day. You have a young Tara Reid of course, American Pie fame, among others. And I'm surely forgetting a few more. Peter Stormare is one of the criminals. Again, a guy who you probably don't recognize that name, but Google it. You'll recognize the face. He's everywhere. So great cast.
Yeah. So I don't think we need to spend too long on the plot, because basically what happens is a series of unfortunate events going from place to place, trying to, in a very loose and intoxicated way fix this problem and manage the personalities, right? You got Donnie, who's just a fuck up.
Yep.
And then you got Smokey, who's like this, he's like a burned out Vietnam vet.
Oh,
but
yeah.
he's not burned out in his energy levels, which is always, he's always at 11.
He's always on.
He's got an opinion on everything.
Oh, yeah.
And he
very loud.
He tries to flex his vocabulary a lot as well. And then you've got these other kind of element. There's one of my favorite like little parts of the film is the nihilists, the East Germans who come in.
Peter Stormare is kind of the leader of that group. But exactly,
And so at one point the dude is in his bath. He's like trying to like just chill out for a minute and relax and try and figure things out. And another recurring theme in the movie is people just keep barging into his apartment and like shaking him down. So these East Germans walk in, they're dressed hilariously. And he's holding a ferret.
Yeah.
He drops the ferret into the bathtub. It's a great scene where
Jeff Bridges is just like flailing about like, oh my God, what? No.
And a great line of like when he sees them all walk up, he goes, nice marmot.
Nice marmot,
man. And then
he's literally smoking like,
yeah,
I'm rolling a doobie in the bathtub.
He's just got a roach. He's got it between a set of tweezers.
Yeah, right. That's right.
So let's talk about the cocktail in this movie, and then we can maybe return to some of our favorite quotes. I've got a quote that I love from the movie.
Oh yeah, we'll break those out. But yes, the iconic cocktail, literally, if there ever was one, the cocktail of the movie. Like, I think of this cocktail as synonymous with the Big Lebowski. I can't think of one without thinking of the other.
Right, they're like
it's two peas in a pod. It's a happy marriage. PB&J, yeah, exactly. Pepperoni on pizza. I don't know.
So I've got it actually all set in the shaker here. I've been quietly assembling it while we've been chatting. It is
sneaky.
The White Russian.
The White Russian.
And this is one of those dairy drinks.
Ooh, a little bit of dairy mixed with alcohol. Lovely.
It's dangerous. I'll give you the recipe really quickly. It's 2 ounces of vodka, 1 ounce of Kahlua, which is a coffee and rum liqueur. And you've even if you've never had Kahlua, you can kind of guess what a coffee rum liqueur is going to taste like. And then you've got 1 ounce of heavy cream or half and half, whatever you've got on hand. If it's milky and thick, it'll work. And then I actually added, as a little kind of bit of flair to this,
little bonus,
several dashes of embitterment chocolate bitters.
Just
beautiful. To really kind of
kick it up a notch. Yeah, take it to the next level. I love it.
Yeah. And so let me talk about some things you need to know about this. One, it's a shaken cocktail. You shake this all up, and you'll notice that there's no citrus in it, and that is because if you put citrus in a dairy cocktail, it's going to curdle the shit out of it. So don't do that. Don't try it.
No, we don't want that.
No. So it's creamy. It's very easy to drink. It's not super healthy for you. It's not something that you want to like make your everyday cocktail, which is part of the hyperbole of the fact that this dude is just constantly making these throughout the movie. I think I saw something where there were like 5 of these made throughout the course of the movie.
It's probably also not a cocktail you want to have probably not more than one of, and the man may not even want to finish it, let alone have several in a day, in a sitting.
Yeah. So here we go. I'm going to shake it up real fast.
All right.
All right. So that's well shaken.
Love that.
And you actually, so with this cocktail, you usually see it served on the rocks. So you basically kind of almost serve it straight out of the shaker into the rocks glass, which is rarely seen. But for this cocktail, it kind of works. And then other things you can do for a garnish. We're not garnishing this one because we're behind mics in a living room. But if you were to serve this in a fancy way at a bar, you may consider grating some nutmeg over the top. A flamed orange peel might also not be a bad idea here. So orange and chocolate and coffee. Yeah. And then one other variation that I'll kind of... Ooh, that is thick.
Easy now.
One other variation that I'll kind of reference is the opportunity to use some other type of liqueur in place of the Kahlua. So you could use something like a Café Patron, which is the Patron tequila kind of version of Kahlua. It's a little bit stronger, so you definitely want to watch the ABV. Check out the ABV on that and adjust the vodka down if you're using a significant amount of that, because otherwise it's going to be a booze bomb. And then you can also sub in things like a nocino, which is a dessert style kind of Italian liqueur made from walnuts. I know that local producer Don Ciccio here in Washington, D.C. actually makes a couple of things that you could put in White Russian, something like a nocino, or they make one that's called Concerto, which is a barley and coffee liqueur, I believe. So anything in that spectrum is totally appropriate to be used in the White Russian. And the Black Russian, which is sort of the White Russian's little brother or kind of sidekick.
And I believe came first.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that.
Got it.
I believe the White Russian was born out of
the
the Black
notes.
Russian, which was essentially, as far as I know, was literally the vodka and the coffee liqueur, the
Right.
Kahlua. And that was just the Black Russian. I believe that first appeared probably around halfway through the 20th century. And then the White Russian came along shortly thereafter. It's said that kind of the first mention of the White Russian was, I believe, in the mid-1960s in California, which is where, in Southern California, where the Big Lebowski actually takes place, kind of the greater Los Angeles area. And it was just called the White Russian because it was a Black Russian with the addition of cream, basically, which, of course, gave it that color. So thus was born the White Russian. But, generally speaking, it wasn't exactly a hit of a cocktail. It didn't become famous overnight. It wasn't something that people were just ordering with reckless abandon at the bars or clubs or restaurants anywhere. It never really fully took off.
It's a silly cocktail.
It really
think
is.
that's why it
If you
fits.
really think about it, you really look at the ingredients and you think about what goes into this particular cocktail. It's kind of strange. I don't know. I don't think it's for everybody.
It doesn't not work. It's just
different.
it's
Unexpected.
I don't know. It's kind of like the kid who picks all of the marshmallows out of the Lucky Charms and just eats those, like just
love
the
that
marshmallows
analogy.
for breakfast.
Love
It's kind of
that
like that.
analogy.
It's over the top. But so let's talk about some of the fun scenes in this movie. There's obviously the scene where he's like kind of like flying.
Oh yeah, tripping. Yeah,
Right.
Exactly. Just kind of, he's like flying in the sky, seemingly, high as a kite or on whatever drug it is. But it's
The dude does a lot of drugs.
Does a lot. It's a common occurrence throughout the film.
What's your favorite? What are a couple of your favorite quotes from the movie?
There's so many. I think, the whole like, shut the fuck up, Donnie. That's definitely one. But then you've also just got literally, I mean, I don't mean to sound like kind of a cop-out, but it's almost like anything Jeff Bridges says in that movie, anything the dude says, oh my gosh, it just has me rolling. I'm cracking up. It's hilarious. He has his catchphrase like, the dude abides.
The dude abides, yeah.
And just whenever he's insistent to people that people call him the dude or that he's the dude, just cracks me up to no end. Like, I'm the dude, man. You're Lebowski, man. I'm the dude. People call me the dude. It's just funny and like stupid stuff like that. And then Walter, Smokey, Walter. Smokey's his nickname. John Goodman's character. There's several scenes where he just explodes. He just goes on these tirades and these angry tangents where he, recalls everything from his service in Vietnam, which is a lot of times the way it's brought up is very random, to just kind of going off about the rules of a totally casual league bowling circuit, at this bowling alley they all frequent. And so there's several times where, at one point the guy literally pulls a pistol on someone at the bowling alley, just kind of contesting his score.
Right.
And literally, this is a crazy act. You're getting a gun pulled on you at a bowling alley at just another member of the league, this random guy. And then, the other guy eventually concedes and is like, all right, whatever, I'll mark the score 0. Freaking lunatic, and kind of like walks off. And then all that Smokey says, because the dude and Donnie, Steve Buscemi's character, are still looking at him. He's just literally looks at them both and he's just like, it's a league game. It's a league game. He puts this and holsters his pistol. It's a league game.
my favorite quote of the movie is also from Walter, and it's when it's near the end of the movie. At some point, the dude and Donnie and Smokey are all in a parking lot, and the East Germans roll up on them, and they basically say that at some point there is a large sum of money, like ransom money, that is kind of rolling around, at least in the background, and everyone thinks everybody else has the ransom money, and so the East Germans think that the dude has it, and he actually has a duffel bag.
Yeah.
And so they think he has, and they're like, listen, all we want is the money. Just give it to us and we'll go. And, they keep on insisting that they don't have the money. And then the leader of the East Germans keeps on going, we will fuck you up.
I fuck you. I fuck you. I will fuck you.
Yeah. Which is great. I mean, it really escalates.
With these heavy, you got to picture it with that heavy, like, German accent. And it's just, it's great. Oh, it's hilarious.
But the part of the scene that I really love is that you see Walter is very ideologically opposed to these men because they don't believe in anything. He says he keeps on saying they're nihilists.
They're nihilists, dude.
They're nihilists, right? They don't believe in anything. And for somebody who is as opinionated as Smokey is, like you can just see like he would not get along with them no matter what. But they're threatening him now, and so there's this amazing quote that I love. And I don't know why I like it so much. It's maybe not the funniest thing said in the movie, but it's when Donnie goes, are they going to kill us? Are they going to hurt us or something like that? And Walter just goes, no, Donnie, these men are cowards. And he said kind of like Donnie's behind, he kind of puts his hand back and like reassures me.
As if he's like a little child or something.
Yeah, because no, he's got this situation well under hand. Just, no, Donnie, these men are cowards. And it's funny because to me, like, that's where he as a character really kind of comes of his own.
Yeah.
So then at that point, the East Germans kind of bum rush him, and Smokey throws his bowling ball at one guy, hits him in the chest.
Yeah, that's right.
And he goes down. And then the leader of the pack comes at him. And I just realized this when I was reviewing the scenes today. You'll probably like this little
what do we
Easter
got?
egg that I pulled out, and it might be bullshit, but I don't think it is.
No, go for it.
So the leader rushes Walter, who grabs him, and they're grappling for a second, and then he bites his ear off.
I don't know if I recall that, to be honest with you.
He bites his ear off, and then he spits it up in the air, and the image of the ear in the air, I think, is an Easter egg callback to 2001: A Space Odyssey, when the bone that the monkey throws turns into the spaceship.
Oh,
because it's filmed in the exact
same way. Yeah,
it's shot in the exact same way.
I will admit, sadly, and I call myself a movie buff, I've never seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, so I believe you, buddy, but I'll have to investigate for myself.
It's a very, very iconic moment that kind of starts off that movie. But anyway, so that was a cool little Easter egg. That's my favorite part, just because it's one of those like little intimate moments where you see a character kind of like really show their true colors. I think Michael Scott has a lot of those moments in The Office, which is why I really love that. I really love that show.
Oh yeah, gotta love The Office.
A ridiculous actor just like has that one little moment where they show you that they're actually like a really amazing person underneath. So anything else before we move on to our final cocktail and our final movie here?
Right. All I can really say, just to sum it up, and I don't mean sum up the story, really just sum up the movie, is it's a movie that I will always love. I have always loved since the first time I saw it. Another movie that I've seen easily several times, and I'm sure the most recent time won't be the last. It's just, it's classic. It's funny.
And it's good to watch when you're maybe not completely sober.
Yeah, no, it's, you know what, frankly, folks, it's a good one to watch with a cocktail in hand, whether it's a White Russian or something else. You pick your poison, but get a little little something in your system, and you might enjoy it a whole lot better. But it's a good one, and
Helps you get in the spirit.
Oh yeah, and I love it. Great movie, Big Lebowski.
Great. So the final movie that we're going to cover here is actually a movie that's based on a book. The movie and the book are called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Oh, you got it.
And it's a book by Hunter S. Thompson. And I would describe this writer, for folks who are unfamiliar,
Crazy cat.
Somebody who is like a beatnik in the second generation of beatniks. So if the beatniks, also known as the Beat Generation, were these writers in the 50s and 60s, like Jack Kerouac from On the Road, like Allen Ginsberg, the poet, who kind of were into experimenting with different states of consciousness, different non-Western ways of thinking, then Hunter S. Thompson is even further down the rabbit hole, completely experimenting with psychedelics. Basically, consciousness as it is not sufficient. And so it was all about dropping acid. In this movie and in this book, which is a lot of people think it's like, and he may have admitted is like quasi-biographical.
Yeah.
There's almost every drug that you can think of.
Oh my God.
I mean, I consider myself somebody who has not done a ton of substances, but is at least is familiar with the names of them. And there's just some stuff in here. There's even, I believe, wasn't there one that was invented just for the... I think there was one that was invented just for the movie itself.
Probably, yeah. I cannot recall, but I think so. Yeah, it sounds right.
So if The Big Lebowski is silly and not sober, then Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is a complete... it's almost like an acid trip.
It basically is. I would characterize it as such in a heartbeat. It's like the perfect description.
And so in the movie, we've got actually a decent number of fairly famous actors.
Yeah, you've got, of course, Johnny Depp in the main role.
Who's like the king of weird.
Oh, yeah, it's been proven many times over. The king of weird, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
The king of weird. Johnny Depp.
Jerry Maguire.
Are you talking about the fake sports agent or Tom Cruise?
Tobey Maguire.
Spider-Man? Is Spider-Man in
Sorry,
it?
Tobey Maguire. See, I told you that's how bad I am with these actors.
Spider-Man's in Fear and Loathing?
Tobey Maguire is the hitchhiker.
The kid from Pleasantville?
The hitchhiker that they pick up on the side of the highway.
You know what? You're right.
It's because he's blonde in the movie.
You're right. Totally right.
Yep.
So, admittedly, it's a movie that I have not revisited per se. It's a good one, but I simply haven't. But iconic nonetheless. And I was just blanking a bit. I guess we were both blanking a bit on some of the supporting cast, but it's a very, very well-known movie. I can't.
Benicio del Toro. Is the third element.
Name was on the tip of my tongue. Benicio del Toro. Yes.
So basically, these two guys are going to Las Vegas to cover an event. They're kind of like journalists or writers of some sort, or they're recording this event. They're meeting up with somebody there to maybe a filmer or something, and they're driving down the road in this red convertible, and they're just already messed up on drugs.
Yeah,
they pick up this hitchhiker, and then basically shit just goes sideways from there. The movie is a very, very much just kind of an exploration of how to portray various altered states of consciousness using film techniques, right? So you have these very famous moments where the kind of the faces of people are getting turned into wacky shapes and stuff. And so a lot of those kind of sensational filmmaking techniques are highlighted here. And I think that's why a lot of film people still mention it.
No, for sure. It's definitely held up. And I don't know if you want to preface now the cocktail that goes with it, but the thing that kind of the part of the movie that really sets into this cocktail that we're about to talk about is the main character, Hunter S. Thompson, that's Johnny Depp's character. There's essentially kind of like a flashback scene near the beginning of the movie, like kind of at the beginning of their journey, right before they hit the road. And Thompson's alter ego essentially is a guy by the name of Raoul Duke. And again, this is Johnny Depp. And he's kind of, hearkening back on this flashback. And he says, sitting in the Pogo Lounge of the Beverly Hills Hotel, in the patio section, of course, drinking Singapore slings with mezcal on the side. So it's kind of like...
And that's the move. That's the moment that's the inciting incident that kicked off this entire kind of bender.
Yeah, exactly.
And the details are filled in
right.
kind of as you go.
But it all kind of started with a couple of these drinks at this hotel bar before hitting the road to Las Vegas.
Right. Which is in and of itself this highly stylized place. They call it Sin City, right? So let me tell you about the Singapore Sling. So the Singapore Sling is almost more outrageous. It's definitely more outrageous. It's even further kind of down that cocktail spectrum than the White Russian is, in terms of, the White Russian being slightly silly, a little bit wacky of a premise for a cocktail. The Singapore Sling is kind of like a tiki style drink that was it was invented before tiki was a thing. And it was invented at an Asian bar in Singapore by a bartender whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce. But it's got a bunch of ingredients that you would never really see together in other cocktails. And not only that, but there's a bunch of different recipes flying around, a bunch of different people making claims of validity to various recipes for this cocktail. So it's one of those cocktails. If you've spent any time studying cocktails and cocktail culture, you've probably run into one of those cocktails where people just don't agree on it, and it's a little bit suspect when people try and make claims to the original formulation. But regardless, I'm going to tell you the ingredients that we're using tonight in this one, and the source for that, importantly here, which is imbibe.com, which I find is a pretty consistent source for cocktail recipes that I like, if there's any doubt. I usually like the way that they go, so that's why I use this for this recipe tonight. So this Singapore Sling, and you're going to get flashbacks to like a Long Island iced tea here when I start listing these ingredients, because there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. You got an ounce of gin, you got an ounce of cherry hearing, which is a cherry liqueur, which I do not have. So I substituted a Portuguese cherry liqueur, ginja, very similar, but a cherry flavored sweet cordial.
Beautiful.
Then we got an ounce of Benedictine, which is a lot of Benedictine. Benedictine's one of those herbal kind of very aromatically intense French liqueurs. And so you've got the cherry liqueur, the gin, ounce of Benedictine, ounce of fresh lime juice, and then you've got a soda top on that. So you're supposed to shake this in a shaker and then top with 2 ounces of soda. And then, you garnish with what almost might be considered like a tiki style garnish. So you garnish with like a pineapple wedge and a sprig of mint.
Right.
And so it's a tall drink, usually served in a Collins glass, and you're drinking it usually out of a straw. But other versions of the Singapore Sling involve things like pineapple juice and Cointreau, and then different ratios of these things. You'll kind of notice the perfect ratio of the 1 ounce gin, 1 ounce cherry hearing, 1 ounce Benedictine, 1 ounce fresh lime juice. There's like an inherent balance in that. But then when you start throwing in some of these other ingredients and other versions, people try and tweak things like the sweetness to make it a more balanced drink when you're adding those other things in there. So that's why I kind of went with this version of the Singapore Sling. I think it's the most palatable. It's the least sweet and crazy that I could find out there. And the last thing that I'll add about slings is that the sling itself is a term for a cocktail that's even simpler than the cocktail itself. And so it's a little bit silly that this cocktail, the Singapore Sling, is called a sling when it's clearly just this uber complex and ridiculous drink.
Yeah, no, so literally, it originally was just the name you'd give to a drink that was basically just composed of some type of spirit, albeit usually it was gin.
The gin sling is a famous drink.
The gin sling, and then usually water and literally just some type of sweetener, usually open to interpretation, not really spelled out, just like something sweet, a spirit of your choice, usually gin, and a little bit of water. So like, frankly, very freaking simple, to your point. But and I don't know if I can who I can attribute this quote to, but it was once said of someone who was speaking about this drink, the Singapore Sling. He said, of all the recipes published for this drink, I have never seen any two that were alike. So just again, to your point, there are so many different variations that have been created and thought up over the years, decades, I guess I should say, since the drink was first created in Singapore at this hotel bar in Singapore. But, you know, they can include anything from various fruit juices to simple syrups to garnishes,
grenadine
to
is
grenadine
very common.
to just like sweet and sour mix. Like, so it's not my thing, but so it's just kind of interesting. It's a drink that has taken on and still can take on many different forms, and it's just kind of funky like that.
Yeah, so definitely be careful if you're ordering this out at a bar. Like, try and get a sense of what's going to be in it if you have a sensitive palate, and you might not like it. Yeah. I guess
you don't necessarily know what you're always going to get is what he's trying to say.
I guess one thing that is kind of nice about that aspect of it is that it does really predict tiki in that way, because the same goes for the Mai Tai and so many of these tiki cocktails, and then house-made ingredients as well.
Yeah.
The recipes were secret. There's a lot of speculation as to what was in them. So I think if there is an appropriateness to that, like, abundance of various recipes out there, it's that it predicts what would happen later on when tiki really came into full swing in later in the 20th century. So that is kind of cool. But I'm going to shake this up here. Right? And,
love that sound.
And interestingly enough, this is also kind of served on the rocks. So rarely do I find myself shaking two cocktails in an evening and not straining them. But this is one of those evenings, and this is a ridiculous drink. So you're gonna be enjoying this out of a bedazzled, oversized wine glass.
Oh my God!
That my wife got somewhere and we never use because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. It's great though. Let's do it. Oh, yeah. Hey, it looks good.
There you go.
It's a very inviting looking drink.
Sorry for no straw.
It's visually pleasing.
Yes.
No straw necessary.
That's okay.
It's good.
Is it even... Let me see that.
Check it out. Check it out. Well made, sir. Well made. It's a good one.
It's...
What do you think?
Surprisingly good.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily think it. It wouldn't necessarily be your first thought, like, ooh, lucky me, can't wait to wrap my lips around this one. But it's
surprisingly good, actually.
Surprisingly good, right. Surprisingly
and I'm glad I picked this version of it, because I feel like if you threw in like pineapple juice and grenadine in there, it would be a little bit over the top. Usually people like adding grenadine to drinks like this because it turns them a pretty color. Mm-hmm. And I think for people who want fruity, sweet drinks, which I'd say that this definitely qualifies for fruity and sweet.
Oh, yeah.
Without going over the edge, I think.
Yeah.
But people who like those sorts of drinks and who are getting them to kind of get in a festive mood, like them also to be colorful and attractive to the eye. So I like grenadine in a cocktail for that reason, because it is visually stimulating. But man, it's just a hit of sweetness that I usually can't justify when I'm kind of catering to my own cocktail preferences. So even when I end up doing tiki style drinks, I tend to err towards a drier tiki than perhaps would be traditional.
Frankly, I would say you and me both, buddy. I completely agree. That's generally more my style too. And admittedly, this is maybe, not even kidding, maybe the second time in my life that I've even had a Singapore Sling. So this is not a go-to of mine, and I'm not terribly well versed in it. But hey, you know what? It's tasty.
Gets the job done.
It gets the job done. It's kind of delicious, and I think part of that is just frankly due to the craftsmanship. So thank you, Kaz. But yeah, no, it is definitely a funky drink. Absolutely.
So one little kind of like local fact I want to throw in. I think what we can do is we can kind of put a cap on the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and kind of say, if you are the sort of person who wants to check out some experimental filmmaking techniques, if you are the kind of person who's willing to tolerate Johnny Depp for more than 30 seconds, which I am not. I really have a hard time tolerating Johnny Depp as a person. I think he's got a punchable face. And,
he's not for everyone, and he does have a punchable face.
So I don't ever expect Johnny Depp to sponsor this podcast, but if you're into Johnny Depp, if you're into that sort of thing, if that's like in your spectrum of movies, then yeah, check it out. And then if you're just really into drugs, I guess, which I guess I'm not, alcohol, I guess, definitely qualifies, but maybe not into psychedelics as such. So that's what to check out if you're into those sorts of things in a movie. But I will say that there is a nice little local connection between Hunter S. Thompson and a local brewery.
Is there?
Yes, indeed.
Do tell.
So we've got Flying Dog, based out of Frederick, Maryland.
Yep.
Very, very popular here in DC.
Very good too. For those of you who aren't aware, Flying Dog Brewery in Frederick, Maryland, just up the road outside DC. I've been there a couple times, done the tour, the tastings, all that. Kick-ass beer, very good beer. Just very on good. A side note.
Yeah.
We can vouch for it.
Yeah. And so they have this label aesthetic, right? Like a Flying Dog beer when you see it because it's got this very specific type of art. And the tie-in is that Ralph Steadman, who illustrated the cover of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, he's done all of the label work, or at least has done the initial label work for Flying Dog Brewery. And it fits perfectly in with the movie. And even like there's the scene with the bats in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and they're like Ralph Steadman style bats.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of basically in early on in the movie, the Johnny Depp's character is tripping and he feels like he's getting attacked by bats.
Right.
And these bats are kind of stylized in the way that Ralph Steadman would draw them. And his drawings are very bizarre. They're I would call them contorted. And just very kind of reminiscent of what I would imagine a bad acid trip is like. And it's just interesting that Flying Dog, this amazing local brewery, has this guy kind of like on retainer for their labels. I like that fact. And it's kind of like, was kind of my entree to Hunter S. Thompson was like, hey, this guy's artist does our labels. And I said, oh, maybe I'll look into this guy a little bit more.
That's so funny you brought that up because you're absolutely right. And literally as you were saying it jogged my memory. I'd forgotten that little tidbit, but that's part of the tour. They absolutely say that at the beginning of the tour. They talk about that really kind of fun, unique connection. So yeah, I'd forgotten about that, but a true story.
Well, I think at this point, I'm going to continue my 30-day fast of no alcohol, which makes me no fun. But E.A. Holtz,
I'm going to finish this sling.
Eric Holtzman, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast and sharing your movie insights.
Dude, it was a blast. Happy to be here. So much fun. Thanks for having me.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, color commentary by Eric Holtzman, and a little bit of movie mixology magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2018.